All right. So we're going to get started straight away. So my name's Luke Bull. I work at StartUpChile for those who don't know me. And I'm going to present the judges. We have a very international and global panel today. So I myself am from New Zealand. We have Ricardo from Portugal. He is the country manager of LetsBonus in Chile. We have Eric. Eric is a native of Sao Paulo, Brazil. And he is the co-founder and managing partner of Monashees Capital. We have Niel from, let's say, redhead Scottish man. From Scotland, lives a lot of life in the States. He's a serial entrepreneur, investor, angel, does many things. And then we have Eric from Mexico, and he is the co-founder and managing partner at Jaguar Ventures. The topic of today is growth, a very ambiguous term, right? And we chose that because we know a lot of you are trying to grow your companies. Raise your hand if you're trying to grow your company. Okay, great. So under that topic, we're going to break it down into some smaller subtopics such as growth hacking, user acquisition, scaling a company, talking about processes, talking about how to think about going into new markets. And so we've put together this panel of guys who have done it before, who have worked with entrepreneurs, and have a lot of experience in these areas. So give a round of applause for our guests on the panel today. So without further ado, I'm going to throw out the first question. Nowadays, the term growth hacking is used a lot. Raise your hand if you're thinking about growth hacking, you've heard a lot about it. Okay, growth hacking. So I want to ask you guys, when is it right to start growth hacking? Is there a time when it's too early to start thinking about growing your company or engage in growth hacking techniques? I'm going to leave it open to whoever wants to answer first.
Sure. Two quick thoughts. One is a common mistake that I see a lot of startups make is fall very in love with the concept of growth hacking before they really understand what axis they want to grow. I think it's very important for any business to go through the first 10, 20, 30, 40 customers, depending on your business, of course, in a very kind of what we call white glove experience, where you're really hand managing them, communicating with them a lot. And what you're trying to understand is the subtleties of what maybe it is about that kind of customer or the specifics of the problem they're trying to solve that you can build a growth hacking program around. So you can acquire users, but if they're all freemium users, because they're not the kind of users that pay, for example, then all the growth hacking work that you're doing to just get leads might actually not be very valuable. So I think being careful to not growth hack too early is important. The second thing I would say is there's a big difference between growth hacking and learning. And sometimes it's very important to run small experiments early on in a business. Very early on in a business. To try to understand some of the subtleties of the customers you're going after. We were talking before about an example where one of the companies that was building products to help make software developers more productive set up an AdSense campaign and created a bunch of different text ads that were very specific about the kind of customer they were trying to attract, and spent maybe $400 or $500 just running the same ads on the same sites and looking at the click-through rates on those ads and using that as a good proxy for the kind of marketing messages and themes and words that they wanted to use before they ever actually built their website. So that's a good example of learning, but it's not growth hacking, but you use the same tools sometimes.
In addition to that, I think it's very important to understand what is the client that you want to acquire. I think sometimes entrepreneurs are obsessed with growing when sometimes they should be obsessed with reducing. And for example, they should be obsessed in how to reduce the user acquisition cost. Because sometimes what they do is as soon as they receive money, they go and use it in internet campaigns. While instead of doing that, what they should be doing is learning what is the more efficient way to acquire customers. And once they learn what is the most efficient way to acquire customers, once they are able to reduce the cost acquisition, is when they should start growing, but not before that.
Can I ask Hello. Cut me out. I'm going to ask a follow-up question on that. You said rather than focused on growing, you should be focused on reducing. So Ricardo has had experience.
Cost acquisition, user acquisition cost.
Okay, yeah, reducing acquisition cost. So Ricardo, I believe you opened up Groupon Portugal, and now you've opened up LetsBonus Chile. What have you guys done to reduce user acquisition costs?
I actually didn't open LetsBonus Chile. We've been rolling for we're going into our 4th year in the market. So I took over about a little over a year ago. No, I mean, what really happens is that I think it depends on what you're aiming at. I would say that most of us would love to have growth that would be organic. We wouldn't have to spend too much money on it, and word of mouth would be the effect, and we would simply grow and not have to be concerned with the acquisition or spending so much money on that. The truth is, it really matters what do you want to do with your business, and what's your the length of time that you have to do so. What's your burn rate, and how fast you want to do it. In our industry, in our case, everything was very aggressive, and there was a lot of money at the beginning. So, not necessarily the best management of the initial into the ground. And I can speak from a very executive point, less on what you do when you get into a market, when you open it, and you have to grow it really quick. And when I say quick, it can happen in 3 to 6 months. But I would say that the prime concern should be quality, meaning that if you have quality in your product or your service, and you're good enough to put the word out there, I mean, the growth will come to you at a certain rate, probably not the one you would want to have, but it will come to you, and it will become much more viral than if you're pushing the envelope all the time, or if you're doing something that might be similar to another business. And in the industry that I'm in, or in the business that I'm in, it happened a lot. There were a lot of copycats, a lot of people wanting to grow very similar businesses at the same time.
Yeah, well, I think growth, just stepping back taking one step back on growth, the importance of growth, which may be obvious, is also retention of talent. I think when you want to attract and retain talent, you need to grow. But grow responsibly. What we observe, we've made, we have a portfolio of companies. We see a lot of different, behaviors from entrepreneurs, and we see sometimes, after you basically raise a round of investment, and then it's important to see, hey, it's not that you got there, it's just a round of investment in funding to then have sustainable growth and responsible growth. And we see sometimes companies just with that cash from that investment, from that round, just trying to grow using just brute force. It's just, I'm just going to grow, and that's what I need to do. And in fact, you need to grow in the right direction. You need to accelerate if you know where you're going. You have to define very clearly what metrics you're looking at. And most of the times, the responsible growth, when you have like the right metrics, will be a result of a lot of micro improvements and not just one magic idea. So it's a lot of hard work of experimentation. So you have to create a data-driven culture, and you have to create an experimentation machine so you can make sure that you will get those improvements and go in the right direction.
I was just going to expand on the quality point. I thought it was interesting, and I might be interpreting the word quality incorrectly, but one of the things I think that's really useful to do is try to understand some kind of a quality metric on your product, and two obvious or basic ones are churn rates of your product. So the last thing you want to do is have hyper growth if you have really bad churn. It's a great way to send a lot of people into your market screaming about how bad your product was publicly. And the second thing is, I don't know if the concept of an NPS score or Net Promoter Score is very kind of common in some of the businesses you're building, but it's a mechanism to very quickly understand sort of where on a scale of happiness or dissatisfaction your customer base is. And if you don't do anything else, look at your churn rates and look at your NPS score, and there's tools that you can measure it really simply in-app before you just start pouring fuel on the fire. I made this mistake in my last business where we took a lot of money and we heavily funded dramatically funded the growth of an app that people didn't like. And you can still go find a lot of complaints online about it. Complaints online last forever.
Actually, every company that we invest into, we ask them to start measuring NPS because we believe it's a great metric that you need to understand, and you need to not only sustain but increase with time. That is a metric that you definitely want to grow continuously.
What are some other metrics that you guys look for when you're investing in companies?
I think I've said this to every session I've had, is that basic unit economics is what almost all businesses reduce down to at scale. The sort of Bible online around unit economics is a series of blog posts by a investor named David Skok, who's was at Matrix and I think is now at Northbridge. And he wrote a series of blog posts that go into excruciating detail about how to think about unit economics. In the Valley, though, if you don't have a 4-to-1 unit economics of lifetime value to customer acquisition cost, it's essentially impossible to fund a SaaS business. It's that simple.
Lifetime value is critical, and it's tricky because sometimes you can see lifetime value from an optimistic way. Okay, well, the client will stay, for 3 years, and you don't discount, this revenue in the future. So you have to be very conservative when you calculate lifetime value, and I think most of the companies are not.
I would add something on that. I mean, our group was it's a Spanish company that was sold to U.S. group in 2011, and if the first initial years the concern was growth, immediately after the acquisition the concern was profitability. We want all markets to be profitable, and so then it becomes there's a totally different process, which is to make everything lean. Everything needs to be really in the size that will make it work, which is a different phrase from the previous one. Okay, so you need to really know where your business is and where you want to go.
So one of the common themes I'm hearing from you guys are talking about is this word experiment came out a lot of that, right? So rather than just focusing on growing, there's some experiments that can be done early on, lean experiments that you can grow. What are some real examples that you have seen in successful companies? What type of experiments are they doing, and what type of experiments could these guys take home and do tonight or tomorrow or the next coming months?
I mean, there's a massive amount of A/B testing technology that's coming out. So I'm sure most people probably use or maybe use Optimizely, which is very common in the States. There's another company coming out called Launch Darkly, which does feature A/B testing. We actually built infrastructure at my last company to do bucket testing for features. So kind of replicating the model that Google has, where you can deploy a new piece of functionality all the way down to an IP address. In their case, they can do IP address, user base, data center, server rack, and it's amazing. And they run thousands of tests simultaneously, and they have an infrastructure to actually undeploy something if something goes wrong. And so then we measure that usually with Mixpanel or Google Analytics. But you have to have some A/B testing framework, even if it's just AdSense or AdWords to understand market message testing. So if you don't have any of those basic frameworks, there's many of them now that start there.
How does the company culture affect growth? I know a lot of people in the beginning are focused on building products, and maybe they're not consciously thinking about the long-term culture that they're creating. But once they start to grow, does the culture enhance, or can it sometimes prohibit the growth?
I would say there that when you're starting, if you get invested, there's a temptation of hiring left and right, and just building the team as fast as you can. I mean, I've seen that happen, and a lot of mistakes were made, and it's very painful for you when hiring, and then you have to let people go, or you make mistakes that's not the right fit. I would say that be very careful when you build a team, but get the right people on board. They will make a difference any day, and that's people that are complementary to you, people that will help you in different markets if that is the case, or technically speaking, they add value on what you're trying to develop. I would say that the team is critical, and the people that are the base of your business.
I agree. Culture is a very broad subject, but the relationship between culture and growth, I think, growth is magic when it starts to happen. Everybody gets excited. I think culture affects more how you grow than if you're going to grow, because I think everybody wants growth, and the teams want. I think the entrepreneurs, if they are true entrepreneurs, they want to grow. So I think when everybody's looking for it, but how you're going to grow, in the end, culture is I think it's unnatural. It's hard to, you're not going to design culture. It's almost like a natural expression of the founders and the leaders' values. And I think how you grow will be defined by culture if you grow in a lean and responsible way again. Or if you're going to grow, well, now we're growing and now we can do anything and do it in any way and spend more money and do it in an inefficient way. I think culture will affect that depending on the characteristics and the personalities of the founders.
I think that two factors that I have found very useful in the culture that is driven by the CEO is first the culture of measuring, and you'll be surprised, but it's not always the case. I've seen CEOs that really don't value measuring, and normally what happens is what you don't measure, you cannot improve. So that's a very important factor in your culture. You have to be the first to want to measure, and to measure the right things. And the second part of the culture is accountability. Because sometimes you measure, but you don't put target. You mentioned that in your talk the other day, and I think it's very important. The best CEOs I have seen are the ones that not only measure, but put expectations and learn from those expectations. Because obviously at the beginning it's very hard to know what is going to be feasible and what is not. But with time you learn. With time you learn that it was feasible, the goal that you put, and the team did not achieve it. And then the CEO has to put that, to make that person accountable, and starting with him or her. So those are two aspects that are, I think, very, very important. The culture of measuring the right things, and the culture of accountability.
Do you guys have a horror story from either your personal company or a company you've invested in that just didn't measure and it didn't have that culture, and they just, as a result, crashed and burned?
Yeah,
I have many.
Yeah, the first business I ever built, it was a distributed performance measurement company back in the end of the 90s, helping people understand how fast websites were, which whenever it was getting online with modems was a very important thing. We sold that business to the world's largest data center company, which at the time was called Exodus. And Exodus was an internet darling, growing to be worth about $30 billion in 5 years. And about a year and a half after they bought my company, they decided to actually figure out how much it cost them to sell a megabit of bandwidth for, and they were selling it for $1,200, and the underlying cost was $2,000. They filed bankruptcy 6 months later, from $30 billion to an $850 million asset sale to Cable & Wireless in 6 months.
Eric, you laughed as well. Do you have a story?
Yes, but to be honest, unfortunately, I have many. But one that I recall is with a CEO of a company. I'm pretty anal about measuring on a weekly and actually daily basis. When I used to be a CEO, I was the type of CEO that every day would see some numbers of the previous day and every week. And I remember having this conversation with a CEO, and he was telling me that I was not visionary enough, that I did not understood that in order to build a huge business, you had to see into the future. And that being said, it didn't took that long for that company to realize that it was important to measure on a weekly basis to understand how the business was doing. Because at the beginning, that's how you learn. You have to measure as soon as you can. Because if you don't measure, you don't know where you are going.
Very good thought. So this culture of measuring, putting processes in place where you measure on a daily or a weekly basis, seems like it's one of those things that lead to success. What are some other processes that need to exist in an early stage company and able to grow in the right direction and be sustainable in the long term?
Well, if you grow, you have to deliver, and sometimes, our companies just give a lot of attention and a lot of focus on marketing and just bringing new clients and users, and you need to fine tune that with your back end and the technology area. Otherwise, success can be a failure. So I think just the process of how the areas communicate and plan together, I think has to be very important.
Picking up on what Eric said there, I think the accountability is critical as well. But it's very important to have a culture that embraces failure. Okay, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything new or that will make an impact as well. Having said that, sometimes we're so busy making our businesses grow that we forget even to celebrate or to just we make something, we reach a certain result, and you need to blow off some steam. You need to embrace people that you work with and celebrate with them.
Are there some red flags you should be watching out for, saying if you see these things, you know what, we're not gonna focus on growing right now?
I go back to what I said before, which is, churn rate is the biggest indicator of you need to pause the business and understand, how to focus on the product, or maybe you have a great product, but you're just slightly going after the wrong kind of customer who doesn't value it in the same way. And there's a lot of different types of businesses, but in SaaS businesses, that's an incredibly leading metric. It's the canary in the coal mine.
For me, and I talk about this in my presentation the other day at StartUpChile, is that if there's not a culture of an efficient use of resources, I do believe that entrepreneurs, the huge disadvantage they have versus the rest of the world is the access to capital, that they have less than the corporate world. So I do, for me, a big red flag is when I see the entrepreneur using the money in superfluous or not in an efficient way. I think for me that's a big red flag.
There's also the situation that we face. I think it happens a lot in emerging markets or in Latin America and Brazil. And we see some companies that are caught up in very competitive markets at the same time. So the companies do similar things. They are 2 or 3 companies that are well-funded competing for the same space. And that's very tricky. There's no, it's a very destructive situation. But what I've seen is that companies that continue to focus on their business, they monitor what the competition is doing, but focus on growing in a sustainable way and not doing crazy things are the ones that are going to survive. And we see many companies just, running this crazy race of just growing because you have to outcompete the other companies. And then I've seen companies that they are losing money in every single product they sell, and they continue to sell and accelerate and incinerate money. And that's very, very destructive. So it requires a lot of discipline not to get into that type of game.
I would add on that focus early on the essentials. Know exactly where you need to be. What's your drive? It's easy if you get invested as well to take your eyes off the ball or just start working stuff that's on the side. But just focus on what you have to do, and worry about the customer and the client, and less about the competition.
I'm gonna change vein here a little second. You talked a little bit about Latin America and this region, Brazil. All of us here are in Latin America. Majority are Latin American entrepreneurs. We've also got companies who have come from overseas to launch in Chile, or they're here for 6 months and they're considering going into new markets. What should they be thinking about when they're approaching a new market? It's a very broad question, so we'll go with it and we're going to break it up. But going into new markets, how do we think about that?
You're talking about companies that are already in one market and then expanding internationally.
Exactly. So, for example, Chile moving to another market in the rest of Latin America. Chile itself is not big enough.
Yeah.
So
I'm a bit biased on that issue because being a venture capital fund in Brazil, investing in Brazilian companies, we have this situation where we have a large domestic market. So, and it's not the case of other countries, of some other countries like Chile, that you have to expand internationally. And it can be really a good way to grow. But my advice, at least from what my observations, is that you have to grow at the right time, after you've proven your business, after you have traction, after you have a business and you have a platform. In my opinion, expanding to several countries too early in the life of the company, it's almost like a lottery ticket. For every company that succeeds expanding too early, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of failures that don't hear about them, but you only hear about the ones that succeeded and you think it's easy. But it's very, very hard. It's already very hard to build a business in one country. And so getting the distraction of building a company in several countries, it's really hard. So I think it has to be step by step.
I have the sad experience of having been part of two failures, of two expansion failures. And I think it's a matter of a couple of things. One is, are you already dominating your market? Do you really understand already the market you are in right now? Because if you don't, then what makes you think that you're going to be able to be successful in other markets? So my first question would be that, how good are you in your local market? The second question I would make is, how many resources do you have? Because expanding to other markets takes resources, and if you don't have enough resources, it's going to be a failure. You're going to need resources to be able to hire talent in that country. You're going to need resources to acquire clients in that new market. So if you don't have enough resources, then that's another thing. And the third question that I would ask is, how good am I? What's the probability for myself to be successful in this new market? Is it big enough? Is there competition? Because that happens sometimes. They go into this new market assuming that they're going to be good at it, and they're not. And let me give you an example. For example, and I don't think, probably it's not the case anymore, but in Brazil, the acquisition cost is lower than in Mexico. So the user acquisition cost, because it's a more sophisticated and bigger market. So if you have a model in which it is based in a low acquisition cost and you go to Mexico, you're going to fail. Because in Mexico, it's not about a low acquisition cost. It's about repeated customer. And that's just one example. So probably you have to understand that. You have to understand how is the market you're going to in terms of size and in terms of receptive to your business. So for me, it's those three things. Are you dominating your local market? Do you have enough resources to grow? And how good and how big is the market that you're planning to grow into?
And I would look at, even having said it, I would still look at other markets if you think you should make that step, but do it in a very analytical way. And we looked at Brazil at a certain stage, and just the cost of entry was huge. I mean, we couldn't build a database to send daily newsletters there because it was too much and you need to be able to recognize it real quick and just step back and focus on your business, either on the prime market that you have or somewhere else.
Does it ever make sense to expand without first dominating your local market?
Do you have the resources? Because if you don't have...
If it's a purely virtual business, if you have the resources, I think it's easier when it's and I mentioned that example, like a games studio can expand expand in the sense of selling all around the world, just very kind of easy and universal to localize. But the moment you need a local presence, you need to localize your product, you need to have a sales force, you need to have local customer support. The moment you need those local people and local offices, then it gets really complex, and you have to make sure. I agree with Eric that that checklist is a good checklist before you think about doing it. It's very risky to do it before you dominate your own country.
No, and imagine, I can give you the case in which you expand, but if you don't do it with enough resources, the only thing you are doing is giving the idea to a local one. Because then probably a local one looks what you're doing and says, well, it's a good idea. I have the resources to do it in my country, and it's going to obliterate the foreign one. So the moment you decide to go into a new market, you have to be ready to be able to compete successfully in that market. Because if you're not, probably the only thing you are doing is advising locals that you're coming without enough resources. And I can give you the example of Amazon. Amazon is going into Mexico right now. They are going with a thunder. They are stealing people from all the e-commerces. They are building warehouses. But they waited, and they have a huge customer base. Mexicans have been buying from Amazon for many years now, but they didn't do it. They waited until they were able to go with enough resources to dominate the market. So that would be my question. So if you have enough resources, okay, probably. But if not, probably the only thing you're doing is helping your competition.
Finding resources is not that easy in Latin America. We're all very aware of that, and that's changing. can you grow without money? And how can you grow without money?
Slowly.
You need to get creative as well, you know.
Creative, yeah. So let's be creative then. So that's a good segue into what are the best creative ways that you have seen to grow without money? Just your favorite trick in the hat, growth hacking, just to grow without money.
So this isn't about moving into an international market, but I did this trick with someone I've been building a company with in Boulder. So we've all accumulated for a long time probably LinkedIn contacts. There's actually a page in your LinkedIn contacts where you can export all the contact information for all of your contacts. It sends you a CSV file of their name, their email address, etc. We wrote a very, very simple emailer through SendGrid that basically mail merged it. And to your point, we asked for advice, right? We were launching a product and we said, hey, like, what do you think about this product? Can you give us some advice? We made like a 1-minute video. And I sent, so we did it in little dribs and drabs, 100 or 200 users at a time. And I copied the CEO of the company because it gave a lot of credibility to the email. By all accounts, this is spam because I don't really know these people very well. It was incredible what we got from it. We got a huge amount of trial customers. We got potential investment from one of the best startup CEOs in Canada. We did get customers from it, and we get a huge amount of feedback, and it costs us $0. And my point of that is that there's a whole bunch of value that's sitting there locked in LinkedIn that we didn't realize was accessible until we came across this one page where we found the export. And the CEO is also a developer. I think he wrote the mail merge thing in about 30 minutes. So that's just a little trick, and how many people in your company times how many contacts they have, right?
How many people are going to go try that right now? You already did it? Right. Oh, very good. Anyone else who's going to try the LinkedIn hack? A couple people. Okay. Other favorite tricks for growing without money?
Oh, I believe with a great product. Two of the companies that we have invested the less amount of money are the ones that are growing the most, and the reason is they have an awesome product that speaks by itself. One of them is an electronic payments company, and actually I was speaking with one of the entrepreneurs right now that it's in Mexico, and he can testify that he told me they are amazing, and they are. So basically these guys, the Connecta guys, that they are, I'm sorry that I'm really not trying to promote, I'm trying to give you real examples. These guys have an amazing product that helps company to charge online. They have never invested so far in marketing or sales, and they are growing because their customers promote them with other customers. That being said, they have already reached the point in which obviously it makes sense for them to start investing into a sales force. But because they had a great product, they were able to grow. So if you want to grow without money, focus on having an amazing product.
And also, I mean, there's a lot of people here. I'm sure there's developers and there's people with different backgrounds. But at the end, we're all salesmen, you know. You need to be able to sell and believe in your product. If you have a great product, talk about it. And not just the pitch aggressive in the 4 minutes. Just be passionate about it. Believe in it. Work on the people that are around you. You're talking to press. You're talking to distribution. You're talking about improvements. But you need to have be able to sell culture across the board, and within, even if you're 3 or 4 people within the company, everybody needs to be able to sell. And not look at it as a dirty word, or, oh no, I don't sell, I just do, I'm on the back office. No, we're all salesmen, okay? Customer service sells, marketing sells, obviously, content sells, everything.
Eric, do you have any cool tricks that you've seen?
Tricks, well, nothing really that, different. There's one company in our portfolio, when we invested, they already had a lot of traction, and they had never raised a single dime, but they were like the best guys in SEO I've ever seen. Like they just dominated, all the tricks of the trade, and they were able to get a lot of, and they had a great product too, which to your point. But you have to find ways of member get member is something that also from a small base, if you have a great product and you you organize it and you plan it well, I think can be really, really effective too.
I was going to say, another company to look at, I don't know how many of you are familiar with, it used to be called SEO Moz, and now it's just called Moz, but they did a phenomenal job of building a customer base of 20,000 customers without a single salesperson, both at the enterprise level and at the sort of prosumer tier. And they did it, most people sort of thought about content marketing as a way to sort of share knowledge as a free, quote-unquote, way to get attention, but they really focused on building community, and there was a growing community around SEO, and they captured that, and they used some tools, and they put all of the content that they were giving away for free into that community, and the community started facilitating itself. And this takes a while to see this, and now the community is probably the biggest asset or sales team that they could ever hope for. So that was an interesting zero-cost trick, but it took Rand 3 years to build that.
Great. I'm going to now open up for some questions from the audience. So we'll open up, and when you ask a question, I want you to direct one of the persons in the panel, and then of course if the others want to pitch in, you can add to the person respond. Who would like to? Rafael, I'll pass you the microphone.
Hey guys, I don't know to whom I should address the question, but I think it's a rather specific question, but I think a lot of B2C startups here have tried when trying to grow virally, and is the referrals technique, like trying to ask your current customers to ask their friends and their contacts to try to use their product or whatever. Can you share experiences or cases where you have, or recommendations that you have for the B2C startups that are trying to do it here? Thanks.
I would just quickly say that if you have the money, you can add credit to it. You get the incentive of that's an obvious answer. But at the same time, I would say reputation goes a long way. I mean, if what you're delivering is better than your competitor, or it's innovative, or it generates credibility and hunger for more. Okay, so that's one of the things that works. Others is the referrals get people to become connectors, in the sense that they will build confidence in their own circle and generate something broader than the initial one. Theoretically, it's beautiful to say it this way, and it's more difficult to implement it, but it can happen. It can be done.
My opinion is that member get members is technology based. What you need to do is have a platform that automatizes all the process, the process of sending the emails, the process of helping the customers being able to invite as much friends as they can. It's technology. It cannot be manual. That's how it grows. It reminds you that you have invited 10 friends and only 5 have said yes, etc., etc. That being said, I would go back to the NPS. What you want is your loyal customers to be recommending you. Those are the ones that are going to recommend you with a passion and believing in the product. So you have to understand who are your loyal customers and have them recommend you, because those are the ones that are going to be interested in the credit. If you ask the customers that only bought once, they're not going to care about if you give them credit or not. But if you give it to those that are loyal, that buy on a recurrent base, those are the ones that are going to be more passionate, first, of talking about you, and second, that they're going to be more excited because they're going to be able to buy into your website. So two things: it's technology first. If you don't have a good technology, a member get money technology, you're in the wrong track. And second, try to target first your loyal customers.
Another question?
Hi. You talked about an experimental machine, but you have to also take care of growing, improve your product, get more funds. And my question is, how much time do you have to take on this experimental machine, and maybe 20%, 50%, because sometimes the resources, or not sometimes, like always, the resources are very limited,
I mean, it's hard to give an exact answer on that, but I'll frame my response in terms of a mistake that I see people make a lot. So I built a business that ran a lot of AdWords campaigns for folks, and we would see a lot of young companies come in and want to run AdWords campaigns for experimental reasons. And what they didn't really contemplate was the concept of what we call data velocity, which is how quickly can you collect enough information to come to a conclusion on your experiment. So for example, if you're spending $500 a month on AdWords and you're paying $1 a click, and you're in a classic industry that has a 2% click-through rate and a 2% conversion rate, it's going to really take you months of time to collect enough data to understand if that experiment really worked or not. And so I think the mistake that people make is they underestimate either how much money they have to spend or how long an experiment is going to take, and they end up getting frustrated and they end up running multiple experiments at once, all of which take a lot longer than they want. So they feel like they're spending a lot of time in experiments without getting any conclusive data. So what I might say is pick an experiment that you can collect information fast enough to get a good feeling for how valuable that experiment was versus the resources, and then ask yourself the question of how to balance that with just the basic block and tackle of the business. I think it's probably the most common mistake in experiments is not actually being analytical about how much time, data, and effort is going to be needed to actually come to a conclusion that has a very thin error rate, right? Nothing's worse than running an experiment with a 50% error rate, right? You didn't learn anything.
Next question, at the back.
It's for Eric Archer. What kind of startups would you like to see more in Brazil? Or in Latin America, even if it applies for...
Successful? No, kidding. Kidding. Billion-dollar successful companies. We are, you mean in terms of market spaces, or what exactly? Because this is in terms of what
the industry
problems. What problems they are attacking?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's actually a combination. We like to say we don't really look at specific sectors. We look at trends more than sectors, and they cross sectors. But I mean, in terms of sectors, if we're talking about sectors, we like a lot education, like healthcare. I think it's very early, but we see more exciting things, and fintech, financial services. So these are three sectors that we like very much. In terms of business model, marketplaces in general. I know I'm stating the obvious, but it's very powerful business model. We have several marketplaces in the portfolio, and I think it's very capital efficient, and when you get it right, it's winner takes all, so it has a lot of benefits. In terms of other dimensions, everything is going to mobile. So mobile first, mobile only companies are also very, very exciting across sectors, and we see more and more of those. And software service as a business model, we're looking more and more. I think companies in Brazil are adopting more and more software service. So you have a lot of growth, and big data, whatever that is. I mean, everything that's analytical, just processing information to solve important problems, offer this type of analytics. I think also across sectors is something interesting. So those are probably the hot spaces that we look at today.
Next question.
Very focused.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. We're going to leave it at that. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists tonight. Once again, thank you very much for participating, for coming to Chile, and for accepting this invitation. Thank you very much. We're going to now end this panel, and we're going to have pizza and beer, maybe I should say it properly, pizza and beer at the back.
Cerveza.
Cerveza. Cerveza and pizza, and there's also some soft drinks. Stick around. In about 25 minutes or so, we'll let you start eating and get yourself refreshed. We're going to then announce the winners of this morning's demo day. So stick around and enjoy yourself. Thanks for coming.